Hey boy, how are you, man? God bless you. Hey, I have a question for you, man. Regarding Saint Joseph, and the whole thing about the dismissal of Mary, divorcing her in sacred and whatnot. Like, what would be the cultural context of that? And if the divorce was going to take place, Mary was going to be repudiated, so how would the cultural context of that would be, man?
Okay, my brother, so let's try to plug some meaning in here, all right? So going to Matthew chapter 1, verse 18. Now, this is how the birth of Jesus Christ came about. When his mother Mary was betrothed to Joseph, but before they lived together, she was found with child through the Holy Spirit. And I'm going to show you some problems right now with the text, the translation. Joseph, her husband, since he was a righteous man, yet unwilling to expose her to shame, decided to divorce her quietly. Okay, that's a problem. We'll see why in a moment. Such was his intention when, behold. Okay, behold belongs in Shakespeare or maybe Thor comic books. Should be just look. Look! The angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary, your wife, into your home. For it is through the Holy Spirit that this child has been conceived in her. She will bear a son, and you are to name him Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins. All this took place to fulfill what the Lord had said through the prophet. There we go, behold again. It's look. The virgin, that's interesting, shall be with child and bear a son, and they shall name him Emmanuel, which means God is with us. When Joseph awoke, he did as the angel of the Lord had commanded him and took his wife. Notice she's already his wife. Took his wife into his home. He had no relations with her until she bore a son, and he named him Jesus. Matthew chapter 1, verses 18 to 25. Okay, so let's start off with verse 18 because that's confusing. This is a topic sentence, right? Okay, topic sentence. Now, this is how the birth of Jesus came about. Okay, that's a topic sentence. It's confusing in translation, isn't it? Because the passage does not actually speak about the birth of Jesus until the last verse, verse 25. The Greek word in verse 18, Genesis, would be better translated something like, these are the circumstances surrounding or connected with the conception of Jesus. Or maybe, I prefer with the word Genesis, the origins of Jesus are thus. Okay, so that's the first problem. Okay, so it's important to distinguish betrothal from engagement. We don't have betrothal in our society. In our world, we have two self-selected partners. They agree to consider marriage at some not too distant time. The ancient world, the world of the Bible, did not know that. That's called engagement. Process by which two self-selecting partners agree to consider marriage in the near future. Marriage in the Bible was the union of two families. Or better, the fusion of honor between two kinship networks, two families, 50 to 100 persons each. It got arranged generally by the mothers and publicly ratified in the village by the fathers. Parents were viewed as acting in the name of God. So plug that into Matthew chapter 19, verse 6. The will of God is the will of the parents. That's what you don't ever break apart. It's not talking about American marriage. Okay, moving right along. The ideal marriage partners in the Bible were patrilateral, parallel first cousins. That means a son marries his father's brother's daughter. Patrilateral first cousin. Okay? Your father's mother's daughter. So what is Mary to Joseph? Well, you got to look at Genesis chapter 24, verse 4, and verse 15, and verse 24, and verse 47. Go look at Saddam Hussein and his genealogy as published on a PBS special. They have it online. They're all first cousin marriages. That's how it is done in the traditional part of that part of the world. The mothers could, now something about arranging the marriage, I'll get to that in a moment. Now in this traditional Middle Eastern setting, mothers could rearrange the choices. And you see that in Genesis chapter 29, verses 21 to 27. The bride and the groom are not really considered as individuals, but rather are merely representatives of their families. This is a collectivistic culture. There are no individualists. These are not Americans. They're not modern post-industrial westernized people. They merely represent the families. So when Jesus prohibits against divorce in Matthew 19, verse 6, please understand that that's rooted in the realization that divorce would initiate a Middle Eastern feud, a blood feud between families. It could escalate to violence, bloodshed. Blood feuds last for generations. Everybody's related in a village anyway. In Nazareth, everybody would be first, second, third cousins because of the patrilocality of the marriages. It's best to avoid them. That's what Jesus is saying. Betrothal initiated the contract, and moving into the husband's house after the wedding completed this process. So Joseph and Mary, they're already married, okay? Sons, single and married, will always live with the father in a large compound. Maybe even the entire village could be a compound. Prior to Mary moving in with Joseph, she was found with child. Okay, that's the passive voice. What does that tell you? That tells you other people found out she was with child, she was pregnant. How? If Mary is already beginning to show, she's far advanced in the pregnancy, right? But given the kinds of robes women wore, how would others know that Mary was beginning to show? So we got to look for a better clue, and it's really in the prescription God gave concerning women and their menstrual flow back in Leviticus chapter 15, 19 to 33. A woman is considered unclean at this time when she's menstruating, and she has to isolate herself from contact with others. Afterward, she has to go make a sacrifice of atonement before the Lord for her unclean flow. In later tradition, which might not have existed yet in the first century, a woman had to take a ritual bath as a mikvah. These baths, like the village ovens, were communal. Now, Mary might have tried to hide the fact that she was pregnant, and normally the busybody women of the village would have learned it and spread the news through the gossip network to children. And so Joseph might have been the last person to find out. So this is kind of shocking. This story is a horror story, and we got so much Christmas tradition surrounding it, we miss the shockingness of it. Think about how shocking this story might be to Mediterranean honor-shame readers. Matthew has to insert this very reassuring comment into the report. He says, Mary was pregnant through a Holy Spirit. It's not the Holy Spirit. It's a Holy Spirit. That's important to understand because there's no article in Greek, ho. There's no the. Therefore, it's not capital H Holy, capital S Spirit. They believe that the air around us is teeming with spirits other than human persons, and that they're doing, and some of them are good. Holy Spirit would be a good spirit. Some of them are malevolent, evil, and some of them are just mischievous spirits that like to just screw around with us. To get that understanding, right, the Greek lacks a definite article in verse 20 and verse 18, right? It's not the Holy Spirit, capital H Holy, capital S Spirit. It's a Holy Spirit, lowercase h, Holy, lowercase s Spirit. Our ancestors in the faith, the person who wrote this gospel, right, Matthew, who his real name was, he did not have a concept of impersonal causality. Hebrew has no expression like it rained. You can't say that in Hebrew, okay? What the expression is God sent the rain. Notice, something happens, always, without exception, there is a person who is responsible for making it happen. If no human person can be identified, then it has to be an other than human person, a spirit. So in this instance, right, Matthew tells his readers that it was a Holy Spirit, a holy wind, right? Rather than a capricious or malicious, mischievous spirit. It's a good spirit. And if one remembers what the Spirit did for Samson, I mean, you look at Judges chapter 13, chapter 14, chapter 16. You look at Judges and you see that's a powerful thing when a spirit enters Samson, he tears the lion in half. He enters Samson and he knocks down the pillars. I mean, you get hit with a spirit, that's a powerful shot, right? That's the idea of this. If Mary is pregnant by this spirit, this is going to be a hell of a powerful kid, right? So one can readily appreciate the role of this spirit, this wind, in Matthew's report. I mean, again, right? So we're talking, the spirit empowered, Samson to kill a lion barehanded and kill 30 men single-handedly. So in the Bible, spirit always means power. Since Matthew describes Joseph as a righteous man, biblical readers in that culture immediately understand the predicament in which Joseph finds himself. Israelites recognize two kinds of righteous men or holy men, the Tzaddik and the Chazid. The Tzaddik is an ordinary person who does his best to observe the Torah, the law of God. the Chazid goes beyond the basic requirements. And he wants to please God, so he goes way beyond. If it's necessary to wash your hands before eating, the Tzaddik is satisfied just washing the hands, but the Chazid is going to wash up to and beyond the elbow just to make sure. Okay, so, at the very least, Joseph knows the child is not his. If he's a holy man, he's not going to accept the child, right? If he were to accept that child, he'd be a thief. That's not what a holy man, that's not what a righteous does. That's not what a Tzaddik would do, or a Chazid. That would displease God, and neither the Tzaddik or the Chazid wants to displease God. So Joseph can't do that. Further, he knows that since Mary is already pregnant, he and she will not be able to produce a blood-speckled sheet to show to the wedding guests, which is Mediterranean custom. And it's Israelite custom. It's required when they consummate their marriage. Deuteronomy chapter 22, verses 13 to 29. This is not a religious ceremony. The whole village gets together. They come to the man's house. He takes her into the house. The first thing he does, one of the most important things he does, takes her upstairs or wherever, and he consummates the marriage. And then they show evidence that her hymen has been broken. This has just been a biological disruption. In other words, they have to show proof of physical virginity. They have to show a blood-speckled sheet. That's not just because she has to prove she had not been with a man before being with her husband. It also has to prove that he's really a man and he can do it. It's a terrifying night for both the male and the female getting married in this part of the world. Anyway, Joseph doesn't want to get that far into the process because it would be shameful for both of them, unwilling to expose her to shame, but it's shameful for him too. In addition, the righteous Joseph knows that he can submit Mary as a suspected adulteress to trial by ordeal, as talked about in Numbers chapter 5, verses 11 to 31. Well, he doesn't want to do that either, so he's willing to forego that, and that's what decided to divorce her quietly. By the way, there's nothing quiet in the Middle East. It should be leniently in the translation. Okay, so now the million-dollar question: how do Mediterranean people solve problems? Not like Americans. For Mediterranean people and for about 80% of the world's cultures, unlike Americans, solutions to problems often come by way of dreams and altered states of consciousness. So dreams and altered states of consciousness, experiences like visions and so forth, these experiences are from Genesis to Revelation in the Bible. They give a person new information. They help him or her to select a new direction in life, give affirmation to them. It's in a dream, which is one type of 30, there's over 38 different states of consciousness. One of them is dreams. And in a dream, Joseph learns that Mary's pregnancy is God's doing. And he also learns the gender of the child without the benefit of amniocentesis. So he learns about the gender of the child, and he learns the name, as Jesus, right? And Joseph wakes up in verse 24, and he follows the insights that he received in the dream. So between the end of the dream and the moment he wakes up, then we have all these little passages that, Matthew ties in with Isaiah. But that's basically what the cultural context is, right? So let's try to plug this stuff in and understand what's going on. Well, at least Matthew's trying to present. Matthew's giving us a tale of terror. Okay? If Mary is found to be pregnant by somebody other than her husband, the fault will lie on her father and her brothers, who were unable to protect her and contain her. And therefore the stain of shame will be on their house. And they will have to not only kill her, they will have to obliterate any trace of her existence. Otherwise, no one will trade with them. And they will become what we now call refugees, displaced persons, and they will die. So in the Middle East, right, they think that they're saving the family by doing honor killings. This is horrific. It's horrible. And this situation is really terrible. And this story is horrific, but we miss it because we've got all this Christmassy images in our minds, these ridiculous scenarios that block us from actually seeing what the text is saying. Now, it's a catch-22. It's an impossible situation. What is Joseph going to do? Well, in the Middle East, you either like it or you lump it. And maybe she's his only first cousin. Maybe she's the only other. Who's he going to marry? Maybe he can do the right thing, exposing her, but then he'll be, single the rest of his life. That's very shameful. Cursed of God. If there was a sin in first century Israel, it was celibacy. So what do you do? Well, You find creative solutions to problems by allowing your cerebral cortex to turn off, and new associations get made. And God uses that. God hardwired us for these altered states without smoking anything, imbibing anything, drinking anything dubious, no use of drugs, just by stimulating the nervous system. And God can communicate to us and affirm us in ways that we could never possibly imagine without that assistance. And look, solution came. It's very interesting that Mark, the first gospel, does not give us a genealogy of Jesus, and there's no mention of Joseph. In fact, in Mark, the first narrative gospel, Jesus is called, strangely, the son of Mary. That's not the Middle Eastern custom or Mediterranean custom. Mediterranean and Middle Eastern custom is you're the son of your father. The only way you would be called the son of your mother is if we aren't quite sure who the father is. In other words, Jesus was probably, historically, the historical Jesus was probably considered a bastard by a lot of people. They weren't sure who his father was. And that moniker stuck, Jesus, son of Mary. That's very interesting. You know, if you're imagining Jesus having this happy, playful childhood in Nazareth, you better think again. It was a tough life. And if you're thinking the Mary, was all roses and beautiful and everybody thought of her as like she's the best woman that ever lived, you got a wrong picture of Mary. Her life was brutally hard, extremely difficult. So we got a lot of wrong ideas that we need to think about.